I'm just glad to see everybody. Welcome, everyone. I see there's a poll that's going around while you're finishing that up. I think let us know in the chat where you're dialing in from. Is it really dialing anymore? You know what I mean? Zooming in from, just so we can get a sense of who is joining us today. Wow, that's great. Very excited about our program. So why don't I go ahead and get started. I'm Stacy Caldwell. I'm with the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. New York. That's awesome. Joshua, good to see you. Tamia, if you will queue up the PowerPoint, I'll blitz through that so we can get our program started. Hey, Beth, I miss you.
Miss you too.
Awesome.
Hi,
all right.
Beth.
And we will have a little breakout so everybody can have some networking time. But let me just go ahead and welcome you to our Forest Future Salon and now virtual salon series that is so exciting. It accommodates so many more people than our old space did. So this is good. My goodness, Anne, I'm so glad you joined us. All right, so moving on. Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, our mission is to connect people and opportunities to generate more resources to build a caring, creative, and effective community. And you can see our amazing team made up of our volunteer board and our staff. And we have, in addition to what we're known for often is our grant making and our scholarships, we have 4 initiatives that represent some of the tougher challenges that take more than any one organization to really tackle. And so we have our community collaborative that is about our strengthening individuals and families. We have Accelerating Housing Solutions. Many of you might know Mountain Housing Council. This Forest Futures project you're going to learn more about today. And our impact investing work, which actually is a bit of a through line in all of those areas. We have been engaged in climate-focused grant making, forest-focused grant making for more than 10 years. These are some of the nonprofits that we know and love and support with our financial contributions through our Nature Fund and also many of our donor advised funds. And our salons have hosted some really amazing individuals who are experts in the field, policymakers, academics. I think this particular topic you're going to find really fascinating. And we love these because it's time for us to really unpack what is a very complex issue. You know, moving here from Dallas, Texas, I would look out at the forest and never realized how complicated it was until we got into our forest work. So we'll give you a little bit of background on that. There we go. Many of you have heard us say this before, and I certainly didn't invent this phrase. A healthy forest is one you can gallop a horse through. This is a picture of a healthy forest, and if you look out your window, I hope you see a healthy forest, but many of us don't see that. Over the years, Tamia, next slide. Over the years, our forests have seen a lot of changes, not only from the weather patterns and the drought that led us to the bark beetle infestation and tree mortality and overgrowth, has just resulted in a lot of high hazard zones across California. A lot of dead wood is in our forest, and our communities are threatened significantly with the catastrophic wildfires. Insurance drops across California has been significant, and I'm sure many of you on this call may have experienced that as well. Next slide. And this has been the worst fire season on record, with more than 9,000 incidents, more than 4 million acres burned, 10,000 structures, and 31 fatalities. This has been a doozy. And so I think for many of us, not only do we love to see the snow because one of the reasons we love to live here, but it also invites a break from the fire season. So our role in the forest work is primarily and first and foremost to bring people together, to educate ourselves, to engage our community. And so that's what the Salon Series is about. In addition to mobilizing resources, those that we've been able to already raise, as well as future resources that we're in the process of raising. And finally, to accelerate those solutions. Now, that's fine. So today, we want to invite you to get to know each other. I can't see how many people. 40 people are on the Zoom today. So glad you made time for us. We'd love for you in your breakout room to introduce yourself. If you have a LinkedIn profile, share it. And as we lean into the season of gratitude with Thanksgiving around the corner, it's a time to just take a moment and reflect on that and share something positive. And also, if you want to share how has technology enhanced your life and your connections. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard, one from my dentist today, that it has reconnected her with her family across the country. So we want to hear how that has maybe enhanced your life. So with that, it'll take us a second. Imagine that you're at the coffee station or pouring yourself a glass of wine. And as we go into these rooms, let's just get to know each other and do a little bit of networking. Bob Bell is here. Oh my gosh. Eliza Tudor's here. Megan. Oh my gosh.
This is Bill. Yeah.
Robert, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Are you wanting to join a room?
Well, I've got another meeting in 20 minutes, so not for very long, I guess.
I mean, the breakout room session, it's only like 7 minutes.
Okay.
Do you want to or no?
Sure. Okay.
Okay, I'll move you to a room. Okay, thank you. You should receive an invite. Kat and Ivan, are you guys wanting to join a breakout room?
No, thank you. Not right now. I'm unfortunately unavailable for that.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, though. Just checking.
Appreciate you checking. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry I'm late.
No worries. Hi there. We are currently inviting all participants to join a breakout room session. It's about 7 minutes, 7, 8 minutes. Would you want to do that or
Sure
just
thing. You know, I'm here mostly as an observer and a happy
Sure.
invitee, but I'm very happy to go join into a room. Absolutely. Thanks.
just hang tight, accept the invite? Hi, Matt. Do you want to join a breakout room session by chance, or you just
Oh,
want
it's
to wait
okay.
on?
I came
Okay,
late. I'm
cool.
fine.
Okay, no worries. Just checking.
Thanks.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good.
We are just finishing up the breakout room session. A couple more minutes. Are you okay
No
waiting,
worries.
or did you want? Okay.
Just, yeah.
Okay.
All good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
just had something to do for a few minutes after the start. So
God, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that you're okay waiting. Otherwise, I would have let you join a breakout room.
thank you.
That's all. Okay. Sure.
Did we all arrive?
I think we're all back.
All right, cool. Best networking in town during a pandemic. And when it's not a pandemic as well. Okay, so with that, I think this is when I hand it off to our amazing team who has put this lovely program together. That is it. So with that, I would like to introduce Robert Suarez and Teal Zimring, who have put together an amazing program for us to share. And I just encourage the presentations are over. I hope that everybody will feel comfortable to engage and ask questions. Feel free to keep the chat going. And with that, I'll hand it over to y'all. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Robert, I can't see you right now.
I'm here somewhere.
But you're in there. There you are. Thank you so much. Robert's really going to jump in and guide so much of our conversation today. So I'll start us with the tiniest logistics note, which is that if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have comments, please feel free to very actively use the chat. I will be monitoring it. And as questions arise, we will keep those and hold them and track them and call on you. So don't lose your good insights and questions. Share them with us through the chat. And the format of today's panel is going to be sort of a sharing from each of our three speakers, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. So you'll hear kind of a deep dive into each of the three organizations. And with that logistics, Robert, will you set the stage for us on the context for the conversation?
Absolutely. Some of you are new to the salons. A lot of you have been with us for a while, so thank you. But really, we've taken a path of understanding, what are the policy, how do you work across the checkerboard. We had Sierra Pacific involved in the conversations. We've had Joint Institute of Wood Product Innovation from Sacramento. So we're going through this path of understanding how do we surround this challenge and drive towards solutions. So what I'm really excited about now is that we're hearing from three what I call solutionists. We know there are big global challenges. Our forest is certainly one of them, but we need to look at others who are addressing these challenges head on. And this acceleration model is one that we're very, very interested in really copying and applying to our forests. So what we need to do, there's not a lot of forest accelerators, there's not a lot of forest venture labs. These things, are kind of specific to us, and we need to drive hard on this major challenge. But what we need to do is look at others who are doing it in maybe adjacent or related spaces. So you hear from three experts, absolute experts, in what they do and how they facilitate others to do great work. So it's very important. Everyone here, whether you're in a community or interested, try to track some patterns that we can pull out and maybe apply to our specific regional challenge. And with that, Teal, as our super networker, always goes and finds the best people in the world. So I'd like you to kind of tee up our crew here, and then we'll hear from our panel experts, get a conversation, and then questions and answers. And there's always a lot of great questions with this crew.
Thanks, Robert. Maybe we just leave it at that. The best people in the world. I guess you introduced them. I will quickly just give a little tiny snippet about each of you so that we can flow between your conversation. We'll dig so much more into who you are and the work that you do as we go. Brenna, thank you for being here, is the Chief Fellowship Officer at Activate, managing the Entrepreneurial Research Fellowships all the way from selection to graduation across all of the programs that Activate supports. And one of those is Cyclotron Road at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where she was previously the Program Operations Manager. I used to spend a lot of time there too at the National Lab, so I love that in common. Peter Miner leads the innovation and corporate engagement activities at Carbon 180, also a Berkeley Bay Area ecosystem person, and has built a startup accelerator and venture fund focused on frontier technology. So we will dig much deeper there. Johanna, thank you for being here, is co-founder and principal of Prime Impact Fund, identifying and evaluating investment opportunities and managing investments toward business and impact goals. She previously worked with the Department of Energy with the EERE office. Renewable energy, I know, is the second half of that acronym, where she focused on launching entrepreneurs and new businesses out of the universities and the national labs and supporting early stage startups with funding, training, and technical resources. So Johanna, you can tell us the first two. Energy efficiency. That's it. Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office at the Department of Energy. So with that ineloquent introduction, Robert, who will be speaking first?
I thought we would, we're going to kick off with Brenna.
Yes.
And then Peter, the Johanna.
Oh, so I did introduce you in the right order. Brilliant. Brenna, take it away. We'll give you controls of the screen.
Great, thank you so much. I will share some slides momentarily. I figured I'd just quickly say that I'm not going to try to pretend to be an expert in forests or even some of the technologies that I work with at Activate. Even though I have a PhD, it's in biophysics. I worked in neuroscience for my degree. And while doing that, I got really motivated by climate and realized this is the defining issue of our time. So then I actually went to the Department of Energy, where I had a chance to work with Johanna on some projects, and then ended up transitioning into the Cyclotron Road, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and Activate organizations. So I will share some slides to just have a visual as we're going through here. And should I make them full screen? I imagine that's better.
That'd be great.
Great. So while that's loading, I'm the Chief Fellowship Officer at Activate, as Teal mentioned, and we're basically a program or an organization that runs a fellowship program for scientists and engineers who want to change the world with their science. So we like to say that we've created a new pathway for these individuals. And it's a win for us if we can support them as individuals to keep them in the game of attacking climate change and other global problems with their science, with their technology, instead of going to do consulting or something else because they just didn't have a way to do it. So what we actually do is we run a 2-year fellowship, which means we take these individuals typically right out of their PhD, their postdoc, out of industry, and we give them 2 years of a salary, some health insurance, so they don't have to worry about their day-to-day, and they can really focus on taking their technology and figuring out whether there's a market for it, whether there's some way they can make a business, because we think it needs to be economic to really reach the scale we need to to meet our climate goals and to start a business. So these are highly technical people. You'll hear from Peter, they're taking an opposite approach, but we help these people learn how to be technology and business leaders of a company and find the resources they need to move it forward. And some quick stats, we've had essentially a 6x leverage of dollars. So we put in around 25 million into these 84 fellows who have gone on to raise almost, and this is even a little out of date, 190 million to move their technology and their companies forward. And we're highly selective. We're oversubscribed every year. That's the main point. And we are taking technologies that really will make a difference. So we ask, if it works, will it matter? And so on this slide, we're highlighting how if only 8 of our fellows are able to scale their technologies, then it will have a massive global impact on CO2 emissions and climate. And we've actually supported, as you saw in the previous slide, 84 fellows. So we see huge potential in what these people are doing. It's a hard pathway. Many of them will likely fail. We're taking high risk things. But it really, hopefully, will matter long term. And as I said, we're a fellowship program. So while we care about these technologies and the impact we're going to make, we understand that it's high risk. They're working on really hard stuff and they may fail, but their next idea, that might be the one that really ends up taking off. So Sarah's one of the founders we have, and we really like this quote from her where she says, her company just wouldn't exist without us. So that's the kind of story we look for. So we started in Berkeley, Cyclotron Road Fellowship, and we expanded to Boston last year with 8 fellows. We're hoping to scale to have 100 fellows per year in 8 different sites. And that's going to take massive government support, a lot of catalytic philanthropic capital, and that's really what we're working on right now. So one of the reasons I'm excited to be here, I'm hoping to learn more about the challenges that all of you faced with forests. But we have one company who graduated this year, who is in our 4th cohort of fellows, called Tahoe. And Robert, I invite you to participate in this conversation with me. But I have basically a case study of what he's been working on that is highly relevant to the local challenges that you're all dealing with. So basically, he acknowledges this challenge that tons of biomass around the world is burned, like rice husks, coconut shells, etc., and that contributes to climate change, poor air quality, etc. So what can we do about that? And as all of you know, if you don't deal with it, it causes wildfires. So the challenge we've had is that these bioresidues are really heavy, they're hard to move around, they're very local. And so here are some funny photos. He actually works with these coconut farmers in Africa to help them create value out of their waste. So he had a lab reactor he created. He basically has a technology that in a low oxygen environment, he heats up this bioresidue to a very high temperature and converts it into like a charcoal, a biochar type product that can be sold and used. And he's actually starting to pilot that right now in the state of California and in Africa. And as all of you know, it will create these different benefits. So I just wanted to highlight him as a case study. I'm not sure if now is a good time, but I welcome Robert to share any extra details, and I'll conclude with that. Stop share. There we go.
Robert? Do you want to respond? We may have lost him, which is okay. He will return. But also, I've spent a fair amount of time with Kevin Kung as well, and we can dig deep into Takachar later in the conversation. Peter, would you like to take us on a journey through Carbon 180?
I would love to. Can you all see slides?
We can.
Awesome. Well, first, I want to thank both Teal and Robert for inviting me to be here today. My name's Peter. I work with Carbon 180, and we're an NGO that is fundamentally rethinking carbon, specifically around carbon removal. So one way that we do this at Carbon 180 is through something that we call the Entrepreneur in Residence Fellowship, which is designed to support innovators to build new carbon removal solutions. So I thought it could be useful for me to share a bit about how we went through this journey of creating the fellowship, which could hopefully catalyze your own thinking about how we can use forest to fight climate change. So first, what is carbon removal? And the answer is actually somewhat complicated, but the simple answer is effectively anything that can pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And it is believed that we're going to need this technology purely just because the amount of emissions reduction that we're on track for now won't really get us to the point where we can stop some of the most harmful effects of climate change. So if we want to have any chance of not just stopping climate change, but potentially reverting back to pre-industrial levels of carbon, we need carbon removal. And so there are actually a bunch of different pathways for doing it. I won't go through all of them, but things like direct air capture, where you can build these massive plants that suck air through it and remove carbon from the rest of the gases there. There's things like general carbon technology and utilization. So how can you turn carbon into things like that, into products? So things like chemicals and building materials, and potentially other goods. There's soil carbon, and I think that relates very closely to forests as well, but can we use the natural environment that we have to actually sequester more carbon that's right now in the atmosphere? So at Carbon 180, we're very agnostic. We're happy to support all of these technologies and definitely do so through our fellowship. But there are many challenges that need to be solved before we can actually make any of this a reality. So the two biggest ones in my mind really are just cost and scale. And as you can see from these numbers, we have a long way to go on both. So we need something on the order of at least 100 gigatons of carbon removed in the next 100 years, up to actually 1,000 gigatons. And effectively, as of today, we have more or less zero on the grid. So if we calculate an average price of around $200 a ton, which is about what it costs now, let's say on average, that would be $20 trillion, which is just a massive amount of money and is not really, I think, sustainable. So I think hopefully it's clear that we need a lot of carbon removal to stop climate change, and it's definitely going to be a challenge to getting there. So that's really the question I think that we like to ask at Carbon 180 when deciding what kind of work we want to do and what we want to build is, if we really have about 10 to 20 years to start making meaningful progress on improving these metrics that you see on the screen, what do we need today to start building in order to get some momentum towards the solution? So I am an engineer by training, so I always tend to come at things from first principles. And if you look at this graph, so carbon removal is going to be a marketplace like almost everything else. It's going to be supply and demand that's needed. On the demand side, there's a lot of work that folks like us are doing around policy and trying to get government to create incentives and market making to really get this field off the ground. A lot of companies are also some of the first to be customers for carbon removal and building them into their sustainability plans. So there's a lot of work on both those areas. I think the other side of it, though, is that we also need to continue innovating. So if $200 a ton is too expensive, then what can we do to drive that down to sub 100 or sub $50 a ton to make it more economically feasible? And then also think how we can make a ton of it. So 100 gigatons is a lot. I'm trying to think of what's the scale. Nothing really comes to mind, but this would be one of the largest engineering projects that humans have ever created. Not out of scope of what we've done in the past, but certainly it's going to be a big list. So these are the areas that I think need the most help if we want to start kickstarting this industry. So at Carbon 180, when we decided that we wanted to do more, we decided to take a look at innovation as one of the core bottlenecks. And the reason we got there is that we had a bunch of conversations with different groups in the carbon removal community. So folks like investors, entrepreneurs, companies who were in support of it, and they all sort of came to the same conclusion that there just weren't enough innovators who were building solutions to this, that more needed to get done and on faster cycles if we were going to hit the metrics that we have. So proof of this came at, we saw proof of this recently with Stripe's negative emissions commitment. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but essentially a company came out and said, we're willing to buy carbon removal at any cost, at any price, for about $1 million a year. And from that call and the global search that followed, they only had about 24 companies come out to participate. So to me, that feels incredibly low. If that you're a startup company and there's $1 million on the table, I feel like you would go above and beyond to try to get access to it. But I think it really highlights that the number of companies who are actually doing credible work in this area are somewhat limited at this point. So it was clear to us that we need a lot more innovation if we want to have a real shot at defeating climate change. So the problem, of course, is that innovation is a very large and diverse segment. It's very unclear about what that means. So I think for us, it was important to identify the right place to take action, and that's what we saw as being the big challenge. So for us, we wanted to find what was the right overlap between the largest problem surfaces and what we thought we could accomplish as an organization. And we came up with what we thought were hopefully two big ideas. So one, the limiting factor is entrepreneurs, that the more people we can get building solutions, the more chance we will have at actually hitting the metrics we need to solve this problem around climate change. And the second was, instead of trying to train new innovators from scratch, what if we could find entrepreneurs from other disciplines? So things like software, hardware, biology even, but feel like they want to do something about climate change and feel the risk around that very acutely. Could we build a program that helped them transition to climate change mitigation as a field, and specifically carbon removal, and do that effectively? So that was sort of the core thesis that we wanted to test out. So to build that, I think there were four things that we put together. So first, we thought we needed a North Star, and effectively what that means is give them a goal to shoot for, since this is a really big problem, and it's important to start building momentum right away. And so for us, the North Star that we gave to our entrepreneurs was think about solutions that have the potential to remove at least 1 billion tons of carbon per year within the next 10 years or so. So there are a lot of really interesting businesses that actually can have great commercial application, but maybe they have too small of a carbon impact. And so at least for our guidance to our EIRs, we really wanted them to think big. The next thing that was important to build was an education program. So I think this is true in most things in climate, but it's especially true around carbon removal, where it's a relatively new field, and there's a lot of really deep science that goes into it. It's not really a well understood field yet. So we wanted to be able to help our entrepreneurs learn about all the different facets of carbon removal as quickly as possible, and then have resources for them to learn even more. I think equivalent to that is having a really strong network, especially when they're trying to learn something new. It's great to have people who you can go to and ask questions. You get the answers very quickly without having to spend a ton of time going through books, reading through literature, or searching the internet. And lastly, we want to provide our EIRs the resources in order to really focus on this for the next 12 months. So we wanted this to be their full-time job and actually do what they can to build a viable business. So that was an important resource that we found to provide our EIRs. And in terms of program design, we wanted to keep it pretty simple. So we engage with our EIRs in 3 different time periods. So weekly, we come together as a group to talk about some of the core challenges they may have or questions that they want to ask the group. I think for us, this is one of the main community aspects of the program. And we find that our EIRs, even though they're building different solutions, a lot of the problems they run into trying to navigate carbon removal of the field are the same. So they can learn from each other almost every time. Monthly, we hold board meetings with each of our EIRs, and that's really to review progress, understand what they're trying to accomplish next in the future around milestones, and then highlight challenges that they have that maybe we can help them with. And then quarterly, we do now remote retreats. It started off as in-person retreats, but these are 2 to 3 days where we get together as a community and learn new areas and make connections and really try to focus on the community building aspect. I'm not going to go through who our EIRs are, but here's just a quick snapshot of them. They're doing amazing work, and if we're sharing these slides, feel free to read more about them. We have more details on our website as well. And lastly, I think I wanted to leave you all, since you're thinking about the same problem around forests, with some key learnings that we developed through the process of building our EIR program. I think the first is to be very clear about the type of entrepreneur you want to support. And there's a lot of different vectors that goes along. So one is, what stage are they? Are they really idea stage and just thinking about potential solutions? Or have they gone about building technology or talking to customers or testing out a new business model? I think also thinking about your entrepreneur in terms of their own skill set. So are they a very technical, science-minded person? Are they more of a business model innovator? Different types of entrepreneurs will require different types of support and services. So thinking about that ahead of time and really targeting the resources you put together can go a long way to ensuring success. I think the second thing that we learned is that it's incredibly important. Maybe the most important thing that we realized is you need to work with entrepreneurs with a deep passion for fighting climate change. And the reason for this is not just sort of fuzzy in your heart. It's because this is an incredibly hard area to succeed in. So it's going to require a lot of grit. There's going to be a lot of failure. And so if people aren't in love with the idea of spending the next 10 years of their life doing this and probably failing, then they may not make it all the way. And the third thing is, it's surprising how much a network of experts and potential customers is a value to climate entrepreneurs. Those are two things that I think are some of the most opaque for them is, how am I going to learn how to build this as quickly as possible, and then who's going to buy this from me? In a lot of industries, that's a very clear pathway for you to go down. In climate, not so much. So being able to have a group building accelerators or other fellowship-type solutions who have that expertise and can bring that to entrepreneurs is incredibly valuable. So I think I just want to leave this one last thought with you all. I'd love to chat more about it in the Q&A, but I think forests are likely going to be one of the key tools that we have for fighting climate change, and not just because of the amazing structures that exist in forests, being trees and in plant life, but actually the immense amount of carbon that is being stored in the soil beneath them. So there's a lot of work that we still need to do around establishing the right metrics and scientific ability to measure how our actions influence carbon in soils and forests and do it in a correct, rigorous way. But that's work that we can do. And we at Carbon 180 are always looking for folks to partner with on figuring out the right way to do that. So love to hear more from you all, either during this session or feel free to reach out to me anytime later. Thank you.
Okay, should I jump in, Teal?
Oh, yeah, sorry I got kicked off for a second, but thank you. Yeah, I'll circle back around, but yeah, let's get kicked off, John. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so can you guys see my slides? Yeah.
We can see it, and it's not full screen, but we can see your screen.
Oops. Okay. Let me try to make it full screen. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, I'm really excited to be here talking with you all. I think forest efforts are really top of mind for us at Prime, although as others have said, it's not an area that we're as knowledgeable in. So I couldn't be more excited about this connection being made, and I really appreciate it. I'm here to talk about Prime, a 501c3 organization, and our investment effort within it, Prime Impact Fund. And so we are not an accelerator program, but we are hopefully accelerating for any companies that we support, and in that way we're complementary to the efforts that you've heard about so far, because we are investing in companies. I'm not going to belabor the points about emissions reduction, which have already been said, but other than to say that we come at our investment activity exclusively from the problem of how do we get at 70 gigaton a year reduction over time. We think that in the best case, a single technology has the potential to avoid about 1 gigaton of emissions. So all wind ever deployed displaces about 1 to 2 gigatons per year. That means to achieve a 70 gigaton a year reduction over the next few decades, we need a lot of shots on goal that are big swings on emissions reduction. So that's very much how we come at the problem, and I think that'll come through in the descriptions that I give. In a way that similarly motivates that Activate and Carbon 180 efforts, What we know is that the traditional kind of methods of financing and supporting entrepreneurs don't work well when we're talking about a lot of the kind of deep decarbonization efforts that need to happen. That is true in transportation, that is true in manufacturing, it is definitely true in anything that looks like carbon removal or forest restoration, where you're not talking about ventures that follow the traditional kind of scaling model, and so you just need different methods for supporting and scaling entrepreneurs. That's of course what we're here to talk about today. Our approach to this has been to leverage what we now call catalytic capital. And so this is, generally speaking, philanthropic capital, although not exclusively. And what really got me excited about the effort at Prime and wanting to build a fund based on catalytic capital is that capital coming from foundations, from donor advised funds, from individuals, has these amazing attributes that the rest of the investment world could only dream of. And those, especially the impact investing world, those attributes are impact first, so incredible impact alignment, and patience, right, in terms of a return. And not only that, but what I was most excited about was that while there's really a funding gap for early stage technologies in climate and energy, and it's a very, very acute one, the pool of catalytic and philanthropic capital is the right sort of size to address that just on the macro scale. So the stat shown here is that if we all could collectively enable 1/10% of catalytic capital to support early stage entrepreneurs, it would more than eclipse all venture activity in this category, which I think is totally mind-blowing and really exciting if you believe that technology and in general new innovative approaches are kind of an underutilized lever in the fight against climate change. So that's what we're all about at Prime. Really about enabling from the beginning. It's been about enabling. Sorry, I'm hearing some feedback, but enabling philanthropists to support for-profit startup companies. So we've been doing that initially through kind of syndication efforts, just matching up interested donors with entrepreneurs who we think are good recipients of that capital. We now do that out of an investment fund that invests at the seed stage, and we will continue that activity with sort of a different style of funding vehicle in the future. I think what's interesting to point out to this group, and that I would hope perhaps this group could get excited about if this model is of interest in developing something specifically for forest innovation and forest restoration, is that what we've been able to do is really gather a big group of supporters, investors who are coming from family foundations, institutional foundations, and a lot of folks from with their donor advised funds that are placing their capital into for-profit startup companies, and doing that through instruments like program-related investments, recoverable grants, and traditional grants. And we've learned a lot basically over the last couple of years about kind of the boundaries of how to do that well and how to do that right. And we're really excited about other organizations who want to kind of launch similar models. So we have worked probably at this point with at least 25 different donor advised fund platforms, and have just learned a lot about the parameters there. So if that's of interest to folks, we'd love to talk more about that. How do we evaluate companies, and who are we looking for? So I think the biggest learning, inspired by Peter's kind of what to think about, I would say a big learning for us has been to set very clear and honestly ambitious targets for the impact that we want to support when companies come through our pipeline. So we have set a threshold of gigaton scale impact by 2050. And again, that's really driven by the scale of the problem. It's hard to find companies that could move the needle that much. but we think given the scale of the problem, it's really necessary to narrow in that way. Our first criterion is really supporting companies that have the potential for that gigaton scale impact, and we kind of model that potential out in-house. Also happy to talk more about how we do that. The second criterion is very particular to the fact that we're using catalytic and philanthropic capital, and it's our additionality criterion. And this says that we're only going to make an investment if it's really clear that we're being catalytic in an investment round coming together. In other words, it is unlikely to happen without us at this time. And we think that's important to be sure that we're always making really excellent use of kind of scarce and precious catalytic dollars. And then third, we are supporting for-profit ventures, and to achieve big impact, companies will need to be big commercial successes, and they're not going to be able to do that unless they can be attractive to follow-on capital and attractive to customers down the line. So the third criterion is we're always looking for companies that really have a scalable business model and can be attractive to those coming in to support after us. So this is just a snapshot of companies that we've supported so far. It's actually out of date by one. We made a recent investment. What I think might be interesting for folks, at least, and especially to kind of piece together the three organizations that you've heard from, is a third of the companies that we've supported so far are Activate fellows. So that's a really critical and probably the most salient source of companies for Prime. And then two of the companies that we've supported are negative emissions companies. Actually our confidence in investing in those are Burdock's, the direct air capture company, and Charm, which is taking waste biomass to convert to bio-oil for sequestration purposes. And really our confidence in developing an investment thesis and eventually making investments in negative emissions was a direct result of a collaboration with Carbon 180, where they really helped us think through the policy landscape and various trade-offs as investors in thinking about negative emissions investment. So I think it's really actually nice that we're all on the call here, and a good kind of representation of how this ecosystem works together. We are really jazzed about the companies reaching impact. I'm not gonna go into each of these examples except to maybe harken back to Peter's point about some corporations really putting a stake in the ground with carbon credit RFPs for startup companies. One of which we were really proud to support, Charm Industrial, and that's also relevant to the forestry interest on this call in making waste biomass monetizable through carbon offsets. And what we're, I think, most excited to see in terms of this early commercial traction, not only from Charm but from the other companies shown, is that while we selected companies with this kind of impact first lens, so far this thesis of impact first but with attention to kind of a real commercial scaling pathway is so far bearing out in terms of these companies really getting commercial traction underway, demonstrating pilots out in the field, and in some cases already achieving follow-on funding. So we're really inspired by these so far. I think I'll leave it there. The take-home message being we've been able to build an early-stage venture fund that is pretty unique relative to typical funds, and that's entirely due to the type of capital that we've aggregated. I think that I just couldn't possibly understate the unique power that catalytic capital providers have in kind of bringing new solutions to market and enabling things to happen that wouldn't otherwise, and would love to brainstorm with this group about how to adapt this model to your cause area as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Joanna. I think I do want to open up the questions, so please use the chat for any thoughts or questions you have given all that content. But we'll activate that. But I guess there's a couple things I want to get to. And one, you mentioned ecosystem and how it's now starting to work. You have symbiotic relationships, which is kind of rare in this, we'll call it the investment venture space, right? From my knowledge, it was not a designed ecosystem, right? This is a very kind of, did everyone find their place? Because you've all made certain pivots, from my understanding, within your organizations or your evolutions of organizations. Can you speak to any of the changes or how that ecosystem has come together?
Well, that's such an interesting question. I'll start, but I'm sure Brenna and Peter will have thoughts. It is quite organic. It's not, there's no top-down design here. I will say, I spent some time with Brenna at the Department of Energy, as she mentioned, where we did try to think in a more systematized way about kind of how to design these things. But of course, it's going to be, in all these cases, it's really about how organizations are powering themselves, and then maybe you can encourage collaboration. So I think that observation is definitely correct. I would say that, there is some finding of our places, right? I mean, a really good example, at least from our perspective, when we went out to raise our fund, a question that we would often get from our prospective LPs was, and donors was, what other services do you provide to companies? Yes, you're providing funding. Are you going to provide acceleration services and the like? And our answer, honestly, was we're going to be very hands-on supporters of the company, and we are. We're board members and just in general very hands-on. But no, we will not be, kind of launching an acceleration program, because there are organizations that we think are doing an amazing job of that. And, we would much rather kind of not duplicate those efforts, but rather kind of strengthen them and direct companies to Carbon 180 or to Activate or draw companies from them, rather than, try to develop our own way of doing it. And I think it is, it's a blessing and a curse that this is a tight-knit community. I mean, I often bemoan the fact that we all know each other, because it means that there aren't enough of us really supporting these companies. I would love for it to be a larger community, but the benefit is that we do kind of know each other's strengths and can lean into that.
Excellent. I guess on that, you speak to accelerators, and I know my new BFF Rosie is on from Elemental as well. But Peter, hey Rosie, I think you shared earlier in our conversations before, we've met a couple of times throughout the last 15 years. Do you have an opinion on accelerators' effectiveness and shortfalls and maybe ineffectiveness in some ways?
Sure. I don't think I have an opinion. I think the key question to ask is not whether accelerators can or are effective. I think they can be, of course. The answer is obviously yes. I think the bigger question is, how can the accelerator do a good job of finding the right entrepreneurs to support at the right time? So I think there are a class of entrepreneur who, I think, as Brenna said this really well, and they probably get this a lot at Activate, but there are entrepreneurs who would not be able to build companies without the support that they get from a program like Activate. So I think those folks certainly can get a ton of support, and I think this is especially true in anything related to climate, where I think a lot of the folks who we really need to be building new solutions and building new companies are people with PhDs and strong technical backgrounds, because there is a lot of science that we still need before this is going to be a field that works. So those folks, unfortunately, are not taught how to think about customers or build businesses as part of that PhD. It's a skill that they don't have. So an accelerator can be a really critical tool for giving them that knowledge and helping them get past, let's say, the first 10 or 20 roadblocks that oftentimes can kill a company. That's certainly not going to be enough. They will see an infinite number of more roadblocks after they leave the accelerator, but hopefully by that time they have enough momentum so they can, be successful and learn from their mistakes quickly. So I think it's more of a question of just finding the right fit between the person and the program.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Well, I get Rosie or Danya, I didn't know you were on here, so thanks for joining us.
All right, well, sure. I mean, I'm very grateful to be here with you all, and wasn't planning on saying anything. I would have put on some lipstick for you had I known. But I think you're absolutely right, Peter. And not to toot our own horn, but Elemental just won a UN, one of 13 organizations around in the world to win a special UN award for the way we are approaching this acceleration, because we started in Hawaii, our focus is very, very place-based. And we are very, very focused on what we call equity in, equity out. This does set us apart. I mean, it's just, you know, I'm talking to other accelerators and they're like, help us figure out how to do this better. With the equity in piece is, how can you take into account low and moderate income communities and also frontline communities in the design of your company as a startup, in your hiring and your retention and your supply chain. And then the equity out is, how are you going to engineer, and this is the part that's germane to what you just said, how are you going to engineer your demonstration or your product or your project to make sure that it has a positive and not deleterious effect on the community who will be acting with it, but also that you are humbly and authentically informed by their knowledge, right? So we have like a square partnership where we work so much with, which is why Robert and I have been in touch. We try to work with community members in the space to have them be part of both choosing who we take into the accelerator and what's the project going to be. Is it something you need? Is it something your inherent knowledge can help make better? Right? We have a lot of examples of that. To me, that's where the rubber hits the road, and we get away from theoretical solutions to real people-focused, people, planet, place-based solutions. As we talk to other accelerators, they've been asking us, hey, how are you doing that? We're going to be coming out with an equity field guide that in the early 2021 that we hope can really be sort of a learning tool for the industry. I'll just point out that 95% of venture capitalists are graduates of Harvard and Stanford, right? We talked about the other day, Robert. That means there's a whole tranche of innovators and solutionists who can't even get in the front door. So we are really trying to be both an accelerator and sort of like a social impact engine at the same time. And I look forward to seeing more of our colleagues going down this path, because I think that is what's going to actually make the difference rather than a lot of sort of theorizing about what it could look like. So thanks for letting me pop in with that, Robert. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for joining. I know we just chatted and I was like, wow, well, it's a perfect tie-in. And I can only imagine, I saw your logo on, granted, you all are working together, which is great and rare. And I guess my point wasn't accelerators don't work, it's just kind of, we have to evolve the model. It's not, you know, they're so young and so early that they have to keep growing and adapting. So thank you for sharing the adaptation. You touched on something earlier about, well, there's two things that are interrelated. The idea of risk, we need a lot of shots at goal, or whatever analogy you want to throw at it, to get a couple of them. So there's high risk, there's not a lot of availability. And from my perspective, being an innovator, right, the only way I can mitigate risk is piloting and prototyping, rapid prototyping, all this stuff. So I wanted to get into the idea of, we've all talked about pilots in different ways. And, you know, is there, I guess for Brenna, we have a shared interest in one of your pilots. So maybe we can start by talking about Takachar and how you see that going. And then Peter or Johanna, if there are any things that you can share in terms of pilots or that process that you've put in place that can help. You know, we've run into people who are fear of risk, right? Investment or whatever else. And I think pilots are the way to get over that. So I don't know, Brandon, can we share a little bit about Takachar and then go for that?
Yeah, let's please do. So one thing I didn't mention as clearly as I could have is in the 2 years of the fellowship, they're constantly making pivots on their market, on their team. Like, we basically think about 4 pillars: technology, market, finance, and team. So they're constantly trying to optimize the 4 of them so that when they leave the 2 years, they can go out and basically be ready to do that pilot. Hopefully they have that prototype ready to go and they can go test it. So as Robert was saying, Takachar is at that phase right now. So he is going to be piloting with, I think it's CAL FIRE, Robert, at the Jackson State Forest.
Yep.
This upcoming year. Mm-hmm. And basically, I believe he's lined up to do some pilots, also coordinated with Robert through TV.
Yeah. So for the community, our region, we met Takachar, we met Kevin, and we are essentially in the short list and in line for the upcoming pilot. So I wanted to throw that out because a lot of the folks here are doing these big little projects. We're looking at something right immediately in front of us in our force. So we're lined up to do a pilot soon. He's certainly open to customer discovery phase. So really, if any of you own land, the only questions are what trees do you have, what's the density, what are you currently doing, so that Takachar can integrate with the overall operations. So for me, it's just sharing that we are making progress. We're not just, the salons are great for talking, but there's something waiting for us. And this is one of probably 30 things we should get lined up. But that idea of piloting and experimenting and rapid prototyping is something that I think is common to all your organizations. I don't know, Peter, if you want to comment on that. I know there's so much prototyping going on within your portfolio.
I think it's a really great question, and is actually one of the big challenges that I think a lot of climate tech and certainly carbon removal companies face, is that when you're building something smaller, so software, consumer products, it's a lot easier to actually build low fidelity prototypes, which you can then test in the marketplace and use that data to go and get the resources you need, either from venture capital or other sources. So I think that's a really important pathway for creating new technologies and doing innovation. And that's just fundamentally harder to accomplish when you're building something that doesn't work until you get to like the $10 million per plant scale. So I'm not sure that anyone has an answer to that problem. I think what I'm always encouraging my companies and entrepreneurs to think about is, one is, how can you do a low fidelity prototype that may not actually be your technology working, but highlight some of the core risk areas that can convince the VC that this is going to be interesting. So sometimes that's just customer interest and has nothing to do with technology, but thinking about how you can do those sort of, create those proof points and that show that you have a business is really important. And I would say the second thing is we really push that our companies, especially the ones doing larger scale industrial technology, is have a really robust TEA. And a TEA is a Techno economic analysis. So it's a way to numerically look at not just what your unit economics are going to be for your technology, so make sure that the financial side actually works, but you can also demonstrate that technically this can really scale and have the carbon impact that you want to have. So that's not a perfect substitute for a prototype. Having an actual thing is always better, but in the absence of that, doing a rigorous job of analyzing what you're trying to build and showing that to potential funders can really help a lot.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder. Thank you, Peter. We have a TEA for Takachar, so if anyone wants that, we can send that across. Kevin shared that with Brenna and I think this morning, so fresh off of the Berkeley press. Johanna, any notes on that, or?
Yeah, it's something we think about a lot when we invest in companies. Are often at this prototype stage, and so post our investment, oftentimes the thing that they are proving out on our capital is kind of at the pilot scale. So we do think about it a lot. I would say one thing we try to do, it actually relates to the comment Brenna just put in the chat, is we really try to help companies buddy up with strategic partners in order to undergo a pilot more cheaply. And that might be a corporate entity, or it might be, an off-taker. It might be, someone with relevant land resources, as you mentioned, Robert. But, more and more we see opportunities for companies to really get creative in terms of their feedstock or their off-taker or their partners. And that can be a way to do it more capital efficiently than otherwise. But as a company starts to, piloting usually occurs in stages. There's like a pilot and then a demo and then a, full-scale demo. And this really occurs in stages. And what we, think about, and honestly one of the biggest challenges is graduating a company from the point where it makes sense for them to do that demonstration on venture dollars to the point where it's really not a good use of the company's kind of corporate equity to finance that next project. And many companies kind of fail into this what's called second valley of death of demonstration challenges, where they really require a scale of capital that venture can't provide, but they're not considered financeable or bankable yet. And so this is really a well-known problem, and one of the things that we are trying to do to address it is really develop structured finance tools that use Catalytic Capital for project finance in the same way that we've learned how to do for venture investing. So stay tuned on that. It's a project that we're getting underway right now and should be about a 12-month research effort before we start doing some initial investments. And the last thing I'll say on that is I'm really encouraged by especially some state level efforts in California and New York in particular to kind of to put public dollars on the line to help companies with pilots and demonstrations. And I think I'm hopeful that there's going to be a lot more of that, but it's a really critical resource for companies.
That's great. Thanks, Johanna. I have an example of that for Takachar that I'll share in the chat as well. But while we have you on, I wanted to see if Benji, you had a related question. If you wouldn't mind getting off of mute and asking the question.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna, for the presentation and all the presenters. It's really fascinating. Thanks, everyone, for organizing. Johanna, I was wondering about your investment thesis or criteria for additionality versus scalability, the second and the third point that you brought up. And if you notice any tensions or synergies between companies or early stage companies and entrepreneurs that fall within that additionality criteria, but then at the same time, like, are they more likely or less likely to have a proven scalable model, and what are the tensions or synergies there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the fact that these two criteria seem to be opposing, or at least not totally overlapping, is like the entire point. We want to find kind of the overlap, the kind of special overlap between a company that has a pathway to commercial success, but that at this moment is a bit too early or a bit too risky for traditional or conventional venture dollars. And so most of our diligence process, once we determine that a company does have the potential for impact that we seek, is actually characterizing this overlap between, is there that pathway, but is it true that the company would not be able to sufficiently raise capital right now? And maybe a concrete way to think about that characterizes a lot of our diligence efforts is anytime that we propose that we consider investing in a company, we get extremely specific about what would they be seeking to prove out on our funding, or what de-risking would occur on our funding. So I gave the kind of pilot example, right? The very first company that Prime supported, a company called QuidNet, which does long duration storage, needed to drill a hole in the ground and see if they could store solar energy that way, and to see if the rock would crack. And no one was going to fund that demonstration, but Prime came in and funded it, and it was kind of a binary outcome. So the results of that test was going to be a key thing to be proven out. And what we do is identify those milestones up front and verify with the entities that would be the follow-on investors to us, that if the company meets this target, or if the company is able to provide data that shows X, Y, Z, or if the company can build out their team to look this way, or if the company can demonstrate, a first utility customer, will that be sufficient? And that's kind of an iterative process, and that's an example of how we try to kind of bridge the gap between those two seemingly opposing criteria.
I love that. Thanks.
So I guess that Teal and I were chatting, this idea of the entrepreneur's journey, there's still gaps there. The way we think, we're trying to figure out where along the journey do we integrate, or how we birth the heroes that need to take this journey. Do you still see gaps that would be good for us to know? Or Teal, do you want to build on that?
Sure, really, I just actually it went all the way back to Johanna early on. You mentioned so many of the projects we fund came from Carbon 180. We intentionally did not create, or came from Activate, we intentionally did not recreate those wheels. We're leaning on the others in that space. Rosie, you spoke about that as well. And so hearing exactly what Robert had then asked you about the continuum, you just mentioned the second valley of death as a place where there is, perhaps a gap. This small ecosystem in which you all know one another and have found ways to collaborate with each other, who's missing? Who's not yet at the table, and what point along that entrepreneur's journey remains an area where you see an opportunity?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I can offer one thought. I mean, there's probably so many dimensions to think about, but honestly, I mean, I think that drawing some inspiration from Carbon 180 and Activate's approaches to, people first tackling new problems is, I don't think that the forestry challenges are really front and center for entrepreneurs who are passionate about climate. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I don't think they are. And I wonder if there's a way for this community to really elevate those challenges and opportunities, and kind of provide frameworks for how to think about them and consider new ventures, but also, as we talked about, kind of be a test bed, or provide opportunities to be a test bed for those companies. I really think, I'm not sure this was the arc of the question, but I really think even just content-wise, the topics that you guys are all focused on are really probably underappreciated and not well understood in the entrepreneurial community. So I think even that would be a hugely valuable addition.
Just to add to that, I think another thing that's incredibly important, which in seemingly what you're working on, is finding ways to bring the voices of folks who are living amongst the forest to really help with deciding on what works. Like, it's one thing to just build technology. It's another thing to build a solution that can help solve climate change for the next 1,000 years. And so, we could go ahead and sure plant 1 trillion trees, but how effective is that if they burn down or attacked by disease? So, we need folks who have to deal with forest management on an ongoing basis to really help inform what's the best approaches to take. So I don't think a lot of that exists, to be honest. A lot of the technology development is happening in urban centers or universities or research labs, but really there needs to be a direct connection to communities if this is ever going to work at scale.
I think the one thing I'll add, we really thought the Activate Fellowship would be appealing to people in established careers coming from industry like Siemens and Facebook, who knows. And we've mostly gotten scientists coming out of academia. And so I think that there's a chance for us to be bringing more people into this space and having them really realize how they can play a role and get excited and motivated, whether it's founding companies themselves, whether it's mentoring people, whether it's being co-founders on the ventures we're helping start. So we're trying to figure out ways to bring more people into this space to help everyone achieve impact.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One of the things we talked about, and also I encourage others to please drop your questions in there. I've received one or two privately, but please go ahead and keep adding them in or just unmute yourself. One of the things we talked about when we were all connecting prior to the panel discussion today that might be an interesting thing to ask you right now is a similar question, building on that. What one thing would unlock greater potential for your work? So within the structures that you have landed on, the moments in time where you are focusing your capital and your energy and your resources, what would you like to see that you think would be the most important opening to increase your potential to reach those 1 gigaton per company or 1 gigaton per organization per year, the huge goals that we heard? Big question.
Yeah, I can start. I think specifically thinking about carbon removal, since it's such a new field, one thing that doesn't exist that really needs to exist is a persistent customer base. So there aren't really there are a few coming online now, but there aren't a lot of government incentives or regulations that are forcing companies to invest in carbon removal versus emissions reductions or offsets or anything. But at this point, we know that carbon removal is going to be required in order to meet the IPCC goals of 1.5 degrees by 2050. We just, at this point, likely can't get there without carbon removal. And the big challenge is how do you incentivize entrepreneurs to take the risk of building companies and investors to put in their LP's money when it's unclear how you actually ever get paid back. So I think a lot of people have theories of how a customer set for carbon removal will arise, and I'm personally confident that it will, but there's a lot that I think we can be doing now to try to move that forward as fast as possible. Because I think having more customers will not only, I think, incentivize more entrepreneurs to get in the game, but will unlock a ton of private capital and potentially government capital that's kind of sitting on the sidelines right now.
Next. I don't see Johanna. Were you speaking?
No, go ahead, Brenna.
Okay. I love that, Peter. Like, there's great examples in biotech and other places where it's like, you have these milestones, you hit them, you get bought by Pfizer or something. Like, we just don't have that in any of these spaces we care about. In thinking about Activate specifically, I haven't really mentioned how we fund fellows. It is very, very sponsor dependent. Like, we work with the Department of Energy, we work with certain philanthropic sponsors, with the state of California, and the impact that sponsor wants to see needs to be the impact that fellows going to create. And that is unfortunately limiting. We don't have any sponsors really, except for very few that can fund fellows that care about the issues that we're talking about today. And so we're trying a couple different fronts to make that, to get more flexible dollars. Like, one is we have a day one memo, if you've heard of that project out, that's trying to get the Small Business Innovation Research dollars, SBIR, used for things like a fellowship program like Activate. So those dollars typically go into companies for research only. And we're like, can you support the people that are doing that research? And those dollars are everywhere in the government that does big research and development. And then also we're looking for philanthropic people that care about the space, that want to be starting ventures in technology. And as they say, we're trying to get to that 100 fellows per year at 8 different sites, and it's going to take a lot of capital to get there.
I think Johanna, I know she had something to step out.
I got kicked off of Zoom, but I'm back.
Thanks for coming back. Yeah, something to the extent of what's missing or what could accelerate all the work that you're doing.
There's a lot there. I guess it's something that Peter mentioned earlier that I'll echo. We think about a lot, which is entrepreneurs that have maybe are coming from other sectors that really know what success feels like and the shape it takes, that are coming into climate, and that's what they're really inspired by. We've invested in one company with that profile of a very successful billion-dollar outcome software company where the founder got religion on climate. And I would love to think about how do we make that not a one-off thing, but actually a pattern as people who are very successful in business turn to what is going to be most impactful for the climate. And that's happening more and more. It's like I would really love to think collaboratively about how to build a blueprint for that, because I actually think that would be just tremendously impactful. And it, as many people have said, it really is all about the people. So entrepreneurs who can really make the almost impossible happen is like what we're all riding on.
Excellent. Thank you, John. I know a lot of people, it's a next career move type of modern elder approach, which I think is super interesting. Benji, thanks for another question. And, it's this idea of how do we convert Fortune 5, I'll read and then maybe do some translation, but convert Fortune 500 companies into, and their interest in carbon neutrality, which we're certainly seeing, I guess, and when it hits forest health, at least some of our approach has been really identifying market-based solutions, partnering with these organizations to run pilots. So really productizing, commercializing the output so that we can prove a market-based solution and then fund the pulling, the harvesting, the transport, the processing of the product. And that's kind of where, from the Forest Venture Lab, we've been focusing in that area. But I guess expanding that to the larger group, what can we learn about the successes so far about Fortune 500's interest in generally carbon neutrality, the environment, forest health, all these things?
I can offer one perspective. It's not, I don't know that it's relevant to the forest part of your question, but it's fresh on my mind because I spent some time recently on some conference calls with the Amazon team. And, I had sort of seen the press releases about Amazon's climate pledge fund and the like, but I didn't fully appreciate the extent of their effort, which is that they did a complete and true bottom-up analysis of all emissions. And if you can imagine the extent of that effort, it's incredible. And to the extent that we have a motor generator company in our portfolio, and to the extent that the Amazon team knew that their conveyors, right, that are shoveling boxes is a huge source of wasted energy. Like if they know that, they really truly did a bottom-up analysis and they're looking for a solution to that. The purchasing power of a company like that, cannot be understated. And so I think that just that pattern of a company doing a true bottom-up analysis and having the balance sheet capital to actually decide to be the market demand for solutions that would address their bottom-up analysis. I'm like, I don't know if that's repeatable, but I hope it is, because I think that is incredibly powerful if a handful of Fortune 500 companies start taking that approach. I think it's going to move mountains.
I like getting them in really just on supply chain alone. Kind of can prove out a lot of the potential impact and the savings, efficiencies, all that. It's great.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's any chance for B Corp or B Labs to start incorporating some of that into their process of becoming a B Corp. Maybe they're already doing it, but perhaps that can also be a medium-term to long-term strategy that can have a lot of ripple effects.
Just to add something else, a different thought. This might be a little bit controversial given this audience, but I actually think it's pretty important that we don't convert Fortune 500's interest from carbon neutrality to forest restoration. And I think the reason why is that we need to be careful not to think that normal forest restoration necessarily has normally, it could be action related to climate change. And sorry, this is confusing, but I think forests are actually one of the tools I think could be the most impactful for fighting climate change, but it's really situationally dependent. So for example, if a part of the forest has been clear cut for timber or something else, and a corporation can come in and basically pay to restore the forest, then the problem with that is the net carbon that we have now removed from the atmosphere is zero, because we first cut it down before restoring it. So while forests can be a really important tool, we have to be careful about the details, because without that, you can get a lot of greenwashing, and the net benefit could actually be zero or less than zero. So I think we should have, in my opinion, I love forests, we should have an infinite amount of money going into forest restoration. I think that's incredibly important. But for incentive reasons, it's probably best that's a different bucket than what the company should be spending to offset their emissions, because that is going up into the atmosphere anyway, irrespective of whether we do a better job of managing our forest. So I think the answer is we should be funding both at the full capacity that they need.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Peter. I guess there's a thread that you asked about B Corps. For all of you on here, is there any preference for the types of organizations and people and structural models that you believe would be most effective to kind of get through to your programs or beyond, and long-term sustainability and market growth type of thing? We've been struggling to figure this out, right? Nonprofit, B Corp, for-profit, all this stuff. What's the best model for a venture? It doesn't really matter.
I'm sure other people have different opinions on this. I don't think it really matters, to be honest, just because if you're going to reach the scale that we need for this to work, so the billions of tons per year, you're going to have some business model that works, right? Like there has to be something that you're creating that other people are willing to pay you for. There's just no other way around it. So unless you can really find a business model that works as a B Corp or a C Corp or an LLC, it just won't work. So I don't think any one structure will get you there in ways that others can. And so I recommend that entrepreneurs focus more on business model and customers and technology development rather than legal intricacies like that.
I would tend to agree with that. Whether a nonprofit or B Corp or for-profit, that's really tax status. What I love about for-profit is it proves that you can make money and it's defensible and you can grow.
I will just add that we're actually very open about legal structure, maybe too much, but one of our EIRs is actually building a nonprofit, but have a clear path to building product and actually having customers in a very traditional, for-profit technology sense. So I don't think actually you even are required to be a for-profit in order to have a for-profit business model.
Fair enough. I think back to the point of the accelerators, all those models need to evolve too. They're not set in stone. They're all young. So I'm excited. It's sometimes more work to kind of push on these structures, but it's an important work that I think we're facing that as well. We're at the 1.5 hour mark, and this is where we like to just see if there's any open questions, thoughts, questions for the panelists, questions for each other. This is a community gathering. But if not, I want to, share any closing thoughts from the crew. Johanna, Peter, Brenna, thank you so much. I know that Johanna's on the East Coast, getting late over there, and we're all super busy and we're all super zoomed out. Rosie, thank you for coming. I love to see you again, and thanks, because Elemental is definitely in the mix with all this crew, so this is not foreign to any of us. But anything, Teal, to share with us, and then maybe we'll share what we're doing. Upcoming in 2021, we'll have more programs similar to this and different.
Not something specific to add, but a reflection just in listening to each of you this evening, and then to the conversation on legal structure gets me very jazzed, because I think that's an opportunity that each of you has found a different way to lean into, is to get really creative in legal structure, and just to draw a little bow around our connection to the forest, which is where I live my life, and my brain and my heart live their lives. I love what you said, Peter, about the need to finance to the fullest of the need within the forest space. Elliot, thank you for jumping in with the resources on public capital and some of the funding that is out there, especially from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. We have so many challenges when we think about market-based approaches to biomass use and wood fiber use. And they really are different, because this is such a heavily regulated space, because we're talking about offtake from federal land, because we're talking about sales to a regulated entity, most frequently utilities. So it's a policy challenge that we confront within the biomass and wood fiber space so significantly, which is, I think, part of why it's so hard to find models that fit into the work that each of you are doing. But I also believe they're out there, and I love seeing Takachar today. And thank you for bringing up the examples where you were seeing entrepreneurship and innovation. And because of that policy problem, that's why I think legal structure is such an interesting opportunity for business model innovation within the forestry space. How can you push the policy windows to open such that the ideas that you see can scale, such that they can receive capital at the different moments where you're prepared to provide it? And how do we move that whole flywheel in one big move? So that's just a little bring it back to the forest.
Excellent. Thanks again. For everyone, hopefully you know how to get a hold of us and TTCF and everything else, especially if you're interested in Takachar and what we hope to be very soon pilot in our region to try to move some and convert some biomass to value. Let me know. Other thoughts, stay tuned for upcoming salons in 2021. And I just want to thank you all again for your time, the experts for sure, and the rest of you for attending, listening in. But I hope to see you all soon. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.